Hi everyone, so today we're going to take a look at midline and amplitude. So as you can see, this graph, which looks like a sine graph, has been bumped up a bit. Doesn't it usually go like through the origin? But now you can see it's sort of up there. So this transformation, this up and down business, is caused by D. And D is also known as the midline. So if we could figure out the midline, we will know what the D is in our equation. Or if we're given an equation, simply by looking at D, we can find out where the middle of our graph will be. So I think if you just look, this would be the midline of this graph. In other words, it's half the distance from the high to the low. So the high is 5, the low is -1. That's a distance of 6, right? So if you take your high to low and you cut that in half, we would, in this case, would get 6/2 or 3. So if we look at our high, which is 5, and we count down 3 spots, 4, 3, 2, that would be halfway, and that's considered the midline. Now, it's also the amplitude, because we decided that amplitude was the distance from the midline to either the high or the low point on your graph. So as you can see, these spaces are filled with 3 units. So the midline is 2, and the amplitude is 3 on this graph. Let's try the next one. What's my midline? Just by eyeballing it, I could see it's right here. So midline is 2, or D is 2. The amplitude is also 2. Amplitude is A. Cool. Now this one's a little squishy, so it's tough to see, but I think right here, that's my midline. And the midline occurs at -2. So my D would be -2. My amplitude is very tiny. It's this little space in here, and if you look at the y-axis, you'll see that it's 1/2. And that's my A. Last one. Now this one's a little tough, so I'm going to use the high to low. I have up here is 5, 5 down to 3, negative. That's a distance of 8. So I believe 4 will be what I need. 4 from the high, right? If from the high to low is 8, if I cut it in half, that's 4. So let me drop down 4 spots. And I think that's my midline. And yeah, that looks right. Okay, the midline is 1. So my D would be 1. And the amplitude is 4. And the reason we're doing this is because the amplitude's 4, but last night you would have said it was 5 because the highest point is 5. That only occurs when the midline is actually the x-axis. So what we're starting to look at now is trig graphs that maybe have been bumped around a little bit, up a little higher or down a little lower. And in this case, you can see that this graph, which appears to be sine, usually starts at the origin and then goes up, down, up, down. If you notice, it actually started up at 1 on the y-axis. So it's as if the origin had changed. Okay, let's do some graphing. So how could you graph this stuff? We did a lot of graphing last night, right? We had a y-axis, and then we picked an x-axis. We had 4 intervals. And we needed to know all cats play indoors. ACPI. This will be a little different. Since we now have a D, that has been introduced. Remember, the function looks like this. F of x equals a sine bx plus c plus d. And tonight we're looking at the a again, we're looking at the b, and now we're adding the d. In another video, we'll talk about c, but not yet. So how can we graph this function, 4 sine 4 theta plus 1? Well, the most important thing is to find your midline. And in this case, it's our d value, which is 1. So I'm going to put a midline just with dots so I can see what it looks like without actually drawing another axis. I want to know my high, low, and amplitude. So let's find my amplitude. That's A, which is 4. So you know that a sine curve goes like this. It would be very nice to know what the high is and what the low is at the intervals so we can make a nice graph. So to find the high, it would be the midline plus how high up the amplitude is. So our high is going to be 5. Our low value will be the midline. Take away the amplitude, -3. So now we can go to the y-axis and say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 will be the highest we ever get, and -1, 2, 3. -3 will be the lowest we ever get. Okay, so what is the period? 2 pi over b. And in this case, b is 4. So my period is going to be pi over 2. So therefore the intervals, if you recall from last night, will be pi over 2 times 1 over 4, which will be pi over 8. So let's mark some of these intervals here. This will be pi over 8. This will be 2 pi over 8, which reduces to pi over 4. This will be 3 pi's over 8. And the last interval, do you remember it always matches the period? The last interval is 4 pi over 8, which can be reduced to pi over 2. So let's graph. Now, we know sine starts at the origin, and if it's positive, it heads upward. Our origin has now changed. The origin is now at the midline. So this point right here is where we will start graphing. Because think about it. We had a regular sine curve, and all of a sudden someone put a d value in, which means we bumped up the curve by 1 unit. So instead of starting at the origin, we're simply starting 1 dot higher. At the first interval, we will be at our maximum. At the second interval, we'll be back at the midline. Third interval at the low. And fourth interval back at the midline. Let's connect this nice and curvy. Bam, there you go. That's a sine curve. And if you notice, it looks like just a regular sine curve, but it is definitely 1 unit above the x-axis. And you could see that most of it is on top of the x-axis and just a little bit got below. That's because someone has shifted this graph up by 1 unit, which is our d. And that's it. That's how you graph. So what are the important things? When you're looking to graph, see if you have a midline change. See if someone gave you a d. If so, that's going to change where your graph starts. Find out your amplitude, because that helps you to determine how high your graph will eventually go and how low it will go. Now, period and intervals, that just helps to graph, right? It just helps to make it look pretty. Okay, let's try another one. 3 sine 2 theta plus 2. Okay, so this is even higher. So our midline is 2. Amplitude is 3. So my high will be 2, where it starts, plus an amplitude of 3, so that's up to 5. My low will be 2 minus 3, or negative 1. Period 2 pi over b. b in this case is 2, so my period is pi. My interval, so I can make it look nice on the graph, will be pi over 4. Okay, so if I'm going up to 5 and down to 3, maybe I'll be a little bit lower, like this. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. That's my high and my low. Oh, sorry, negative 1. My bad. Not negative 3. Next, let's make some interval markers. 1, 2, 3, 4. My intervals will be pi over 4, 2 pi's over 4, which is pi over 2, 3 pi's over 4, which you can't reduce, 4 pi's over 4, which is pi. Notice it matches your period. The last interval will always match your period. We did this last night. Okay, we're talking about a positive sign. We need to find the midline, which was 2. So let me just do a little bit of this so you can see where it is. Plotting our points, sign will now start at its new origin, which is at the midline and the y-axis. At the first interval, it is at its maximum. Second interval, midline. Third interval, minimum. Fourth interval, back to the midline. Let's connect this in a nice curvy fashion. Bam. Look how high that is. That sine curve is almost completely on top of the x-axis. But other than that, it's a pretty basic sine curve. But it's definitely been pushed to the north by 2 units, which is thanks to that d. Now this one's going to be weird. Watch. You have a midline of negative 2. That's not a big deal. That's cake. But look at this amplitude. The amplitude is a half. So it's not going to have a lot of up and down action. So I'm going to change the scale on the y-axis just so we can see a little better. What else? Okay, period. Nope, sorry. High and low. High and low. So the high value is going to be the midline plus the amplitude, which is negative 1.5. The low value will be the midline minus the amplitude, so negative 2.5. You could see that everything's really negative. The midline's negative and the highs and lows are negative. So what I think I'll do is I'll go up north a bit with the x-axis like this, because I can tell most of my action's going to be downtown in the negative zone. So let's do, let's make everything a half, like that. Okay, midline, negative 2. Just a couple of dots so I can see where I'm going. Good. Now, let's see, 4 zones, 4 intervals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. What shall we label those? Well, we need to know the period, and that's 2 pi over b, or in this case, b is 1. Okay, there is no b, see that? Okay, cool, so the period's 2 pi, which means the interval will be 2 pi over 4, or just pi over 2. So the first interval is pi over 2. The second interval is 2 pi over 2, which is pi. Next guy's 3 pi's over 2, can't reduce that. And then 4 pi's over 2, which unless you live in West Virginia, is also known as 2 pi. And notice, 2 pi always matches. Whatever your period is will be your last interval. Cool. Okay, let's do some points. So let's see. Aha, cosine. Now, remember the cosine graph. It starts at the top of the mountain and does one of these deals. If it's negative, it starts at the bottom of the valley and then does that. So the cosine graph starts at the maximum value on the y-axis. So that's up here. Our max is negative 1.5. So right about here, that's our starting point. By the first interval, it's through the midline. By the second interval, it's at the minimum, negative 2.5. At the third interval, it's made it back to the midline. And at the fourth interval, it's back to the maximum. So look at this little tiny squishy graph. I'll try to exaggerate the curves a little bit. There. Oops, I missed this guy right here, sorry. That's a cosine graph. If I exaggerate it, it would look like that, okay? But it has such a small amplitude. It's so squishy, you could hardly tell. But the most important thing to recognize is this. The x-axis is right here. Look how far down this graph got pushed. It got pushed down 2 units. So, I hope that was helpful in learning how to graph where there's a vertical shift, in other words, an up and down shift. So I'd like you to try the last graph on your own and bring it into class, and we can go over it together. Have a great night. See you tomorrow.